Som.
Bom dia a todas, todos. Muito obrigada pela presença. Com muita alegria que nós começamos os seminários desse ano. Foi, como vocês sabem, a gente, por causa da pandemia, ficou muito tempo interrompido, tudo foi difícil, mas agora, e eu já começo a responder um pouco às inquietações de vocês, que nós vamos responder por escrito. Nós achamos que seria importante fazer esse esforço presencial nesse semestre, e aproveitando que a gente tem a possibilidade de receber pessoas, pesquisadores muito interessantes, que têm muito a dizer. Por isso, mas, enfim, depois a gente conversa exatamente sobre a questão da presencialidade, mas nós achamos muito importante criar de novo esse clima de debate, esse clima de discussão rica e de convivência no Instituto, que nós perdemos durante a pandemia e que nos faz tanta falta. Os seminários são um espaço muito rico para a gente pensar, para a gente discutir, para a gente conhecer novas perspectivas. Então, por isso, eu agradeço muito aqueles que puderam estar presentes. Nós estamos também transmitindo, porque para aqueles que não estão em São Paulo ou que têm alguma outra impossibilidade. Então, nada melhor para começar essa série de seminários do que receber e fazer vocês conhecerem, abrir o espaço para vocês conhecerem bem o professor Aleksandr Sherstobitov, que vai nos dar a alegria e a honra de estar conosco no IRI esse ano todo. O professor Aleksandr tem a vida acadêmica dele, principalmente, né, desenvolvida no Departamento de Ciência Política, na Universidade Estatal de São Petersburgo. Ele vai estar por um ano aqui conosco. Ele é pesquisador da FAPESP, né, num programa especial da FAPESP. Então, nesse momento, ele está conosco. E aí eu vou passar a palavra a ele. E é isso. So, sorry, I don't know how much you're learning Portuguese, right?
I'm starting, yeah. I have just started.
Okay. So, okay.
I
The
can
floor.
understand a little bit. Yeah, I cannot speak yet, but I can understand a little bit.
Okay.
Some words are really the same, even not between Portuguese and English, but also between Portuguese and Russian. Which sounds weird to
Yes.
my mind, but yeah, there are a lot of them.
Okay. So, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to present my research and research of my colleagues. And yeah, this research has already started. It's an ongoing project, and many thanks to Institute of International Relations of USP and to FAPESP that provided funding to continue this research, and thanks to Professor Pedro who helped me a lot and for his assistance in everything regarding the bureaucracy here, but also in the research that we're going to do together then. So actually this is the ongoing research. So I have done, together with my colleagues from Higher School of Economics from Moscow, we have just started. So the project, the research project, is about 3 stages. So today I will introduce the first stage, so the framework of our research, as well as some preliminary results. And so probably I will, if I have the opportunity, I will present more later in several months. If you're lacking in presentations, if you're lacking in presenters, I'm going to present 2 times because there are 3 stages. So I think we'll handle it, somehow. Yeah. To start with, I'm in networks, and my research interests are rather different, but all of them are somehow connected with the network research, network studies in social science and political science. And this research project is dedicated to the study of co-sponsorship networks in authoritarian parliaments. Today I will start with the Russian parliament, with State Federal Assembly, which is 2 chambers, which consists of 2 chambers, the lower chamber State Duma and the upper chamber the Council of Federation. And actually, the network, the research of networks of parliaments is rather popular in contemporary political science, and such kind of studies started like 40, 50 years ago. And there are different types of networks that can be revealed with the help of network approach. For example, we can focus on, and there are studies that focus on voting patterns, different institutional ties. For example, when the nodes here are deputies, the members of parliaments. And the ties may be revealed with the different ways, such as institutional ties, for example, the members of the same committees or the deputies of the same factions in the parliament. Or, for example, we can use the biographic method to reveal the ties between different deputies. For instance, if they studied together at the university, or if they had the experience of working together in some other institutions in business or whatever. We can focus on interest groups when different deputies represent the interest groups, and if we manage to find the linkages between interest groups and deputies, we also can use this as the indicators of the ties. I've heard about some. Frankly speaking, I haven't read yet, but some of my colleagues in Russian universities, they use the discourse analysis to reveal the ties between deputies, and so the co-sponsorship networks. There is a Well, comparatively big scope of studies of co-sponsorship networks in contemporary political science. And for instance, why do researchers use this network approach to study the parliaments? The political and policy, this network research can identify, can help us to identify the political and policy preferences of the members of parliament. For instance, we can focus on the formation of coalitions and the process of the coalitions formation within the parliament structure, and then we can explain somehow why these coalitions emerge, or why do deputies collaborate with each other, why are they co-sponsors. So the co-sponsors, the concept of co-sponsorship is that when the members of parliament co-sponsor the bill. So they're the authors or co-authors of some bill, and they promote together this bill. So this is the co-sponsorship. Or for instance, we can focus on the correspondence of networks of co-sponsorship and roll cast vote, for example, regarding the specific area of policy making, or for example, social networks that occur. So how the social networks, for instance, if we use the biographic method and we find the linkages between members of parliament from their background, and then we can compare the social networks within the framework of the parliament and the co-sponsorship networks. So there are also many research regarding this. The big issue here is that there is a kind of consensus in the political science. Of course, we know that the consensus in social science is not solid. It may move, but still there is a kind of consensus in contemporary political science that there is no politics in authoritarian parliaments. Like the role of the parliaments in authoritarian countries, in authoritarian regimes, is just the kind of rubber stamp. The institution that stamps the decisions that were developed somewhere else and within the autocratic structure. For example, when we talk about Russia, this is the center of the decision making is the president's administration, where they develop the decisions and then they push the deputies to legitimate these decisions. So the parliaments in authoritarian setting are formed and maintained to imitate the democratic constitutionalism. Yep. So officially, this is the democracy. There are separation of powers. There are different roles of the political institutions. But at the same time, in reality, the parliaments are kind of on downward flow. They're not important in the decision-making process and so on. And the deputies, the members of parliament, are just the soldiers of legitimation. So this is the big issue when we talk about the authoritarian parliaments. However, the recent research, not only by Russian political scientists, but also by some British ones, for example, Ben Noble published not long ago the paper together with the Russian colleagues. They published a paper that is focusing on the decision making in Russian parliament, and they argue that Russian parliament is not just the rubber stamp, that there is some kind of politics, maybe in some areas, not in all areas, but still in some areas there is politics and policy making, independent policy making, and so on. So this is our motivation. However, just to relax a little bit, so the Russian parliament, so you probably have heard about this English notion, the rubber stamp. In Russia, since 2011, when there were a lot of protest rallies against the falsified elections, the electoral fraud, the Russian parliament got the nickname among protesters, the mad printer or the insane printer. Like the institution that produces a lot of bills, and this caricature is about like the speaker of the parliament says, colleagues, members of parliament, please try to remember what else we haven't banned yet. what else we haven't prohibited yet? For instance, this one, Boris Gryzlov, he used to be the speaker of Russian State Duma, the lower chamber, and this is the real story. It's not. This is the meme based on a meme, based on the real story. There were some arguments in State Duma, and the speaker said, "Colleagues, please stop arguing. Parliament is not the place for discussions." There is the videotape, so it's the real case. Yeah, the Parliament is not the place for discussions, which sounds weird because the Parliament is the place for Parliament is the place for discussions. This is also very interesting, just kind of side story that the Parliament in English-speaking tradition, the place to speak. Duma. State Duma. Duma in Russian language comes from the word to think. So Duma, it was like the Boyars Duma in Russian Empire, not in Russian Empire, in Russian during Tsar times. So it was Duma. So the place where aristocrats thought, not spoke, not argued, discussed, but they thought. So Duma. So the great ideas of great people. The Parliament is not the place for discussions. So what was the motivation for the study? So at first I have already mentioned that there are some kinds of studies. There are also already studies that show that there is some kind of politics, maybe not in all spheres, not in all areas of policymaking, but still there is there are argues, there are discussions, and there are independent strategies of the members of parliament. So to some extent, the parliament is controlled by the president's administration, by the autocratic elites, but at the same time, there is some room for discussions, there is some room to promote deputies' own strategies. It's not only about the research, it's also about our own observations. So I used to work, not to work yet, I used to, I had the opportunity to observe the members of parliament activity within the building of parliament. I used to talk with the deputies, used to talk to not only to talk but also to collaborate with the assistants of the deputies. And these observations also gave me a lot of food to see that there are some negotiations, there is politics inside State Duma, inside the Council of Federation, and so on. So what is this? What is the room? What is the window of the opportunity to be independent for the deputies and to promote their own strategies and so on? So maybe there is something that our research can reveal from this perspective. This is complicated. Yeah, so this is just the table. I decided to insert it into the presentation. You see how many, I think it's close to Brazilian type of governance and policy making. There are a lot of subjects of legislative initiative. And here we can see that in bold, the deputies of State Duma and the members of Council of Federation, the upper chamber of Russian Parliament, so their role is increasing. The number of bills they develop and promote is increasing from the convocation to the convocation. However, not all of them are adopted in the long run, and this is one of the limitations to our study because we use State Duma API, and just those bills that are adopted or that were adopted are in the API. So this is one of the limitations, but still we can handle it further when we do the next step of our research. So what are potential questions, research questions that can contribute to the theory of authoritarian theory of to the theory of legislative, different theories within the framework of legislative studies, and particular to the understanding of how authoritarian parliaments work. So other coalitions in the authoritarian parliaments, and if yes, what are the determinants of these coalitions, as well as what is the purpose of these coalitions? To what extent do members of the parliaments follow their personal strategies, and what is the balance between the personal strategies and the strategies that are controlled by other institutions, autocratic institutions? What are the limits of freedom within the parliament? Yeah, what are the individual, in the long run, what are the individual strategies of the deputies? So our research questions are, to be more specific, have two levels. The first one is exploratory level, and for exploration, as an exploratory strategy, the network approach is very fruitful, and I will show you some preliminary results that we already have right now. But also, we want to enhance the explanatory power of the network studies. So the next stages of our research is to develop the explanatory model to reveal the strategies of the deputies, but also the potential contribution here is not only the contribution to understanding of how authoritarian parliaments work, but also we want to make the kind of theoretical contribution that enhances the explanatory power of network research. So data and method. So we take the, as I have already mentioned, we take the data, we obtain the data from State Duma API. We obtain the data about the bills, about the co-sponsors of the bills, and a lot of data regarding the attributes of each node, so attributes of each deputy. These attributes are age, gender, faction, committee, region they represent, and some others. So more attributes we managed to find, more specific, more precise would be our research. So some attributes are obtained from API. Some attributes are, for example, about the background and so on, are just Googled or interviewed and so on. So this is also the strategy for our research to go further. And on this exploratory level of analysis, we map the a lot of graphs, but two basic types of graphs, the undirected graphs of sponsorship. So today I will show you the results of the analysis of the 7th convocation of the State Duma. It's from 2017 to 2021. Yeah. And the directed graphs of co-sponsorship for each year. So inside this convocation, we also distinguish 5 years to make the ERGM model, exponential random graph modeling. I will tell you a few words about this. Yeah, this is the exponential random graph modeling. I will not go now into the details of this model. So actually, this is the statistical model. It's not like the regressions that are often used in social science. In network research, in network studies, in graph theory, there is another type of statistical modeling. So in easy words, it's like the algorithm calculates the probability. So we have the graph, and then the algorithm calculates the probability that this graph appears in the long run after a lot of different simulations. So it takes a lot of time. For example, my home computer, it takes it about 2 weeks to calculate everything for one convocation. So it's a lot of simulations, this exponential random graph modeling. We started with ERGM model. However, we are going to, I will tell a few words as far as I remember, there is some in my presentation, but we're also going to make the stochastic oriented modeling and quadratic procedures, QEP. So here are our hypotheses for explanatory analysis. They're like rather banal to my mind, but still have to test them to see if it works in Russian parliament, because usually these hypotheses are used as the basic ones for any researchers, for all researchers who study the parliaments, so in democratic settings. So we also try to focus on this basic research, basic hypothesis to see if there is something that we can find regarding Russian parliament. Yeah, why we took convocations? Because we do not analyze just the State Duma, the lower chamber, but also the upper chamber. But to distinguish the periods, we took the 7th convocation. However, the data is obtained regarding both the State Duma, the lower chamber, and the Council of Federation. So there are ties also between the Council of Federation and State Duma. The easy thing here is that almost all of the deputies of almost all of the members of Council of Federation are also members of some political party. So it makes our research a bit easier because we can find the mutual attributes both to members of Council of Federation and the deputies of State Duma. So yep, here are our hypotheses that for instance, members of parliament are likely to co-sponsor bills that are sponsored by legislators affiliated with the same faction, with the same committee, with the same electoral district or region, unit of federation. Or for instance, for example, if they have the same age, or they are comparatively of the same age or of the same gender. Yeah, the hypothesis number 5 and 6 are more about inferential analysis, and we also made this inferential analysis with the help of ERGM. So here is the map of the network of co-sponsorship during the 7th convocation. The colors are the colors indicate the faction. So there are four factions in State Duma: United Russia, Just Russia, Communist Party, and Liberal Democratic Party. It's tricky when you talk about Russian parties because Communist Party is not the Communist Party. I mean, ideologically, Liberal Democratic Party is not Liberal Democratic Party ideologically regarding their program, but still they have this names. Yep, they have these titles. So what do we have? So this is the map of the co-sponsorship network. It's just for visualization. It says nothing. For further analysis, we made the binary ties equal or more than 10. So we just took into consideration the ties when two deputies co-sponsored the one bill for 10 or more times. So this is a kind of, so we weighted the ties, and this is the indicator that these two, if two members of parliament co-sponsored the bills for 10 or more times, this is the indicator that they collaborate intensively. That is why we decided to, and here you can see that the binary ties are more specific, and even the visualization can show us something. So at least we have two basic preliminary results regarding our hypothesis, that members of parliament tend to co-sponsor the bills of their counterparts representing the same faction or the same committee, which is banal, but still we managed to find out it in this, and it works. And at the same time, there is no evidence for co-sponsorship homophily when we talk about the electoral districts or regions. It may sound tricky, but we have the explanation. Very often, the deputies that represent different regions have nothing in common with these regions. It works for Council of Federation for sure, which is really weird, because the Council of Federation is the upper chamber of parliament, where each region delegates two members of parliament who represent the region. So upper chamber is the House of Regions. Still, there are a lot of weird things when the deputies whose background is completely connected with St. Petersburg represent Khabarovsky Krai, which is in the far east of Russia. It works somehow. The same is with the deputies of State Duma and so on. So we have the explanation. There are no ties between the deputies who represent, there are no biographical ties or regional ties between between deputies who represent regions or electoral districts, and actually there is no any evidence that age or gender may be the predictors for establishment of co-sponsorship ties. So it's banal, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure if. Yeah, I think you can see it. So our exponential random graph model shows these results. Can I? Okay, so the cutoff. So the most important here is the cutoff equal to 10. Yep, this is the binary type. So the most dense ties, the most important ties between the deputies. And what do we see here? That the most important are faction match, which is banal, but at the same time also committee match, a little bit important. All others are maybe important if we reduce our level of our units of if we reduce our analysis to some specific areas, and we are going to do that. For instance, if we focus just on the bills focused on foreign policy, or if we focus on the bills that focus on higher science and research and higher education. In this case, probably this committee match or something else would work. For instance, I have kind of hypothesis that the age would work for research and education policy, because a lot of young members of parliament, they represent higher education institutions. They have ties with higher education institutions. So this is the further hypothesis that probably we'll try to test. But what is also interesting here, our finding, you see reciprocity. What does it mean? It means that very often, if in directed graph, we also mapped the directed graphs. The directed tie means that one deputy was the first one who sponsored the bill, and all others joined him to be the co-sponsors, to promote the bill. In this case, we find the arcs, the directed ties of prestige. And it appears that if several deputies, some deputy, we talk now about binary ties, if deputy co-sponsored the bill of some politically important deputy, this deputy then co-sponsors the bill of this deputy who. So this is the reciprocity. That is why there is a very nice hypothesis that we will test then, so that probably there is the strategy to sponsor the bill to get the pay back from the deputies that possess important, in terms of State Duma, in terms of political establishment, possess important big political capital or social capital. So, and we see that this is very important. The reciprocity works almost all the times. Oh, for instance, there is also one important, there is no this finding here. It appears that a very good predictor for establishment of co-sponsorship tie is the floor where the cabinet of the office of the deputy is situated. So the deputies who have the offices on the same floor establish more ties, co-sponsorship ties, rather than deputies from other floors inside the building of State Duma or inside of Council of Federation. So this is a kind of, I have some kind of explanation that is based on my ethnographic method. When I used to talk to assistants of deputies, or when I used to work with deputies of State Duma and Council of Federation, it appears that a lot of assistants who work in the office of the deputy, of the member of parliament, they have a lot of ties with the assistants in the office, the next door office. They go out for a smoke together, they go out to have a coffee, they go out for lunch and so on. So when deputy needs some kind of support for the proposed bill, he gives this task to his assistants. And what do assistants do? They go to their friends who are the next door. This is also, it's interesting, but I don't know how to proceed further in political theory in this, because this is more not political theory, but kind of anthropology.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you said that already, but is there any faction that is more successful in their initiatives?
Yeah, of course. This is United Russia faction that is more successful in the initiatives, because United Russia faction is the faction of president, and it's the ruling party, and so on. And yeah, the reciprocity also shows that. Thank you for your question. It is really nice that I haven't mentioned that. That there's reciprocity often works this way. The members of other factions, they co-sponsor the bill represented by the member of United Russia faction, and then the member of the United Russia faction pays back and co-sponsors the bill if it is okay with the policy of the ruling party. They co-sponsor the bill of the deputy from another faction. Yeah, it works. It works.
Lilu has another question.
So,
Yeah.
I have
Maybe we have.
Yes, yes, because we're transmitting.
Yeah, we're. It's like.
We can pass.
Hi, so I'm Murilo. I'm not really sure if I understand when you talk about co-sponsorship. It's between two legislators from two different parties. Do they have to be from two different parties, or can they be from the same party? And I also, it's not clear to me the difference between factions and committees and political parties in Russia. So if you could please. Does anyone else?
I will answer then. Okay. So the first about the so there are political parties that participate in the electoral process. As yeah? There are political parties that participate. Yeah, it works.
We want to
Just
turn off.
push. Yeah. There are political parties that participate in that are in the elections. The State Duma, the seventh. There were several changes since 90s. Nowadays, the State Duma is elected on the mixed system. So half of the deputies, 225 deputies, are elected according to proportional system, and 225 deputies are elected according to majoritarian system. The country is divided into 225 electoral districts. But actually, those who are elected via majoritarian system also represent political parties. And when deputies are elected, they join into factions. Usually, these factions are the same as the political. So the party membership is the same for the faction. The committees are the institutions within the framework of State Duma and Council of Federation. There is the Committee for Education and Research. There is Committee for Enlightenment, просвещение, enlightenment, primary and secondary education. There is the Committee for Research and Higher Education, Committee for Foreign Policy, Committee for Defense, Committee for Social Policy, and etc., etc. So, and usually when deputies get into the parliament, they decide who will be the head of some committee and what faction appoints deputies to different committees. So actually in each committee there are deputies of different factions. Yeah, and of course about the co-sponsorship networks. Each bill has a lot of usually has a lot of co-sponsors, not just 2, 3, 5, 6, and so on. So we take all this data to represent the map of co-sponsorship, but then we reduce the number of ties. We take just the most important, the most weighted ties. We use this binary, equal or more than 10, and sometimes, for example, there may be triads, like 3 different deputies are so densely tied together that they are co-sponsors of like dozens of bills. But to make the exponential random graph modeling, we still have to divide them into diads. However, this is a potential further step to take the triads, or the structures of 4 co-sponsors, and so on and so on. We use this K-core in network research. These are K-core clusters. So we can take like 5 core cluster where there will be 5 nodes, 5 members of parliament who have more than, for example, 10 ties together, and so on and so on. Yeah, so what's next? What's next? We will develop our inferential model, including 6th and 7th convocations of State Duma, to make our ERGM model more specific. And we're also going to use the stochastic-oriented model, which is another type of stochastic modeling. And I already mentioned that one of the key goals is not only to understand how authoritarian parliament, how Russian parliament works, but also to create a framework to study of other authoritarian parliaments, as well as to enhance the explanatory power of networks of network studies of co-sponsorship. And now I'm working on the game theoretic model to see how within these networks, how different actors, different deputies develop and promote their own political strategies. And probably these political strategies are somehow reflected in the ties they establish within these co-sponsorship networks. And there is, I haven't mentioned this on this slide, but also one of the ideas for further research is to go to specific areas of policymaking, for instance, to foreign policy issues, and to see how deputies collaborate within the framework of foreign policy, and we can make the comparative study, for instance, with Brazil, and so on, and to see if there are some patterns or whatever. I think that's it, not to be, yeah.
Thank you thank you very much, Aleksandr. So the floor is open to questions, but I just want to ask something very simple, just 2 questions. But I know the students have the priority. But one thing is, in the table you showed, when you have the numbers, so does it, is that the, I forgot the name, but when you have 3, 4 above, what is that?
The who, what institution or who introduced the bill?
Yeah.
So 3, 4
Yes,
convocations,
yes.
convocations of
The
students.
convocations. So
yeah.
convocations is like a term for us?
Term, yeah.
Okay,
Term.
perfect.
So
Yeah.
the terms of Seyduna.
Okay, and the other question.
Russian parliament is rather young. Yep. So
Yeah.
the first
That's why-
term was in 1991.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was for
that's
2
right.
years. It was kind of intermediate one.
Okay.
The first was for 2 years, and then for 4 years. Then they changed the legislation, and nowadays it is for 5 years.
Okay, okay, perfect. And the other thing is that if you can mention when you're answering other questions, how or which criteria you're going to use when you go further with the study and you choose other parliaments, like authoritarian parliaments, if you have that already. So, because you just said comparing to Brazil, but let's say that we hope we're not an
No, not yet,
authoritarian
not yet.
parliament. So, which criteria you thinking of using to go further?
Yeah, for the comparative analysis of authoritarian regimes, so we'll use the polity4 index, for instance, and so on. So the usual
okay.
indices we use to separate regimes into different cohorts.
Okay, okay, good. But it's open, so we have the microphone here. If you guys want to. Adriana. Embaixo.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. I'm not a political scientist and very little knowledge of network analysis. But what I was thinking about is that you were interested in analyzing authoritarian parliaments. And all the variables you were using to describe politics, you said that there is politics inside this parliament, so it's legitimate to study them. But you use the same variables that are used to study non-authoritarian parliaments. So how can we learn about the difference between authoritarian parliaments and non-authoritarian parliaments? How you're going to convince us that the mechanism of authoritarian parliaments are similar or dissimilar to other parliaments in the world? How do you think I'm going to be convinced that they are different or they are not?
Thank you. So actually, the network analysis may be used for any kind of institutions where there is kind of networking. So it works for sure. But for the next step, for instance, for example, when we try to develop the game theoretic model, there are different approaches to game theoretic modeling, and there is already a scope of literature focused on creation of coalitions in authoritarian settings. For instance, by He's a Russian, but he works in MIT or Harvard, I don't remember exactly. Together with his colleagues, they published a nice paper about the coalitions in authoritarian context. Or there is also research of coalitions in China, the elites coalitions in China, and so on. So we will try to adopt, but these models focus on inner elite coalitions, not on parliamentary coalitions. So of course we'll have to adjust these models, but we'll use this kind of coalition formation models from authoritarian settings. But actually this is still the theory of rational behavior. So it may work even for democratic or non-democratic settings. However, the settings here are the most important. Yep, and we'll have to work hard on explanation of how settings affect the strategies. In Russian case, there is for sure one important scope of these settings. Rule of law and rule by law. So the democratic settings, they usually described with the principle of rule of law. The Russian setting is described by unrule of law or rule by law, when the law is used to rule. So this is completely informal way of governance and informal way of ruling the, for example, the parliament from the president's administration. So in our game theoretic model, we'll develop this agenda, this framework.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. And I was just wondering if during any of your research or kind of like founding the basis of your theory and stuff like that, if you used any social network analysis, kind of the work of like Harrison White and stuff like that, which is more sociology, but also bases more on like the idea of identities and like connections between the nodes and how social kind of networks form. Because basically I did a lot of research in this in my undergraduate, but it was something completely different. It was on ancient Greek religion. So it's quite interesting to see how this could potentially be used. I know that you said quite an interesting thing was having the deputies on the same floor and stuff like that. It would be very interesting to see if that's a factor that goes into kind of the identity of each of the deputies and why it might influence why they choose their co-sponsorships and along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. This is my personal criticism to network studies of the studies of political networks. That actually most of the studies are the studies of social networks. If we talk about political, not policy networks, because policy networks are mostly institutional ones, but political networks, mostly in contemporary political science, are mostly the studies of social networks in politics. But what does make them political? Outcomes. The outcomes of the networking. And here is my methodological criticism that I'm trying to overcome. The explanatory power. So nowadays, the network research, the network approach is used to study the networks themselves, and the ways to find the connections between networking and political outcomes is a very, very tricky situation for a researcher to find this causal inference between networking and political outcomes. That is why my idea is to develop this game theoretic model. So this will be the social network analysis enhanced with the game theoretic modeling, and then it becomes like kind of political analysis. Yep. So we see what are the political outcomes of the social networking inside State Duma or inside the Russian parliament and other authoritarian parliaments.
Where?
No.
Yeah.
I got it. Yes. So good morning. I would like to ask if this model can be used to analyze also external influences into a parliament. Like, I will get another country because it was the country that I studied during my undergrad. And is it possible to use like this model to analyze lobbying in the US? I don't know, like I studied the lobbying into climate policies, and I want to know if it's possible to use it or it's just too difficult. Thank you.
Definitely you can use this, and there is also already the methodological literature on this, if we can find... So the problem here is the operationalization of ties. So if you manage to operationalize the ties between the member of parliaments and interest groups or some other institutions who are outside the parliament, it works.
Thank you.
Hi, Aleksandr. Thank you for your lecture. I was wondering if you considered how an authoritarian parliament can also have some kind of opposition, or you didn't look through this aspect in your research? Because I think, I don't know, that in the democratic parliament, the opposition has a very important role, because it tries to bring like points that are like try to bring what is missing in the project and tries to like negotiate in order to implement and adjust the project. So it kind of like this makes the parliament to discuss more and make better bills or projects. So I was wondering if that kind of thing happens also in an authoritarian parliament or no.
So there are two. Thank you for the question. I think there are two potential answers to this question. The first one is easy. We can say that in authoritarian parliaments, all of them are just the puppets. They're the quasi-opposition. However, they are not opposition when it comes to some important political questions, but they may behave as an opposition when they follow their own strategies, or when it comes to not political questions, not questions regarding the foreign policy, defense, this political system, but when it comes, for example, for social policy, pensions, stipends to students, and whatever, they may argue, and they may be the opposite, like Communist Party may be the opposition. So this is the, but actually, like more in some cases puppets, in some cases they are opposition, but still it's quasi-opposition in this case. Another answer is more complicated. Like 10 years ago, we tried to test if cartel party theory developed by Katz and Meyer, if you have heard about them, cartel party theory works in the Russian parliament. So in few words, cartel party theory the cartel party theory was developed by Katz and Meyer. They studied the multi-party parliaments in Western Europe. And it appeared that even those parties who are opposite each other and they're big enemies, when it comes to the legislation regarding elections, basically, they tend to collaborate because they're already in the parliament, and they collaborate to establish barriers to others who are not in the parliament. So they arrange the cartel, and it works in Germany, in Sweden, in Italy, and so on. Just when it comes to And we tried to test, we decided to test this theory if it works in Russian parliament. We also managed to find, and there were a lot of changes in middle of 2000s, from 2005 to 2009. There were a lot of amendments to laws regarding the party legislation and electoral legislation. So we had about 130 bills that were adopted during this period. And yes, it appeared that all parties collaborated in most cases, but there was one party, just Russia, that time. The deputies of this party, they never voted, most of them didn't vote against the bills, but they, when there was the voting inside State Duma, they stood up and left the parliament. So this was their kind of signal that they're opposite. Because for sure these laws would be adopted because of United Russian majority and so on, and all others supported it, but still. So this is also kind of indicator of what happens inside the parliament, and in some cases parties may behave as if they're even is their real opposition. Still, by the way, sorry, still this practice can be observed in State Duma when deputies, if they're against, or we can think that they're against, they do not vote against. And they do not abstain. They leave. They leave the parliament. They leave the hall of, or they do not come if they know that this bill will be adopted today. I'm ill, I'm sick, and I'm in a business trip, and so on and so on. So this is a very interesting strategy that is developed within the framework of Russian parliament.
Thank you, Professor. Well, in your current stage of your research, did you manage to see if the deputies had the influence of their social classes, like if they are representing a middle class, if they are part of an elite, if they have connections with oligarchs, or it is a stage of your research that you are managing to see in your future, like in the developments that you said right at the end of the presentation?
It's very it's a good suggestion, but I'm not sure if it is possible to do that because it's very difficult to operationalize this kind of ties. So basically, we could say that each deputy represents some business interests. Almost all of them represent some business interests. Okay. Once I used to collaborate with the assistant of the deputy, and he said, we went to get coffee in the building of State Duma, and I said, well, why did you decide to become the assistant of the deputy? He said, actually, I just bought this, what is like the card of the assistant. I do not help my chief. I have business in Moscow region, and I just wanted to get the ticket to enter the building. So he works as an assistant, and he told to me that, like a professor from St. Petersburg, we had a long history of collaboration, and he said, well, now my business is okay, and now I'm helping my friends to do the same. And the price was about 2 million. So it's very cheap, 2 million rubles. It's like divide to 15, and you will get the price in reais. Like a bit more than 100,000 reais. There are stories when deputies bought, not deputies, candidates bought the place in the proportional system, the list of candidates. So there were, it sounds weird, I guess. There was the story when one candidate, he paid to the party 50 million rubles, which is about $1 million US that time, and he paid for being in the list with a high probability to get the mandate, to be elected. And when the election was finished, he was in that place, but somehow the party members, like party bureaucracy, they changed his place, and he didn't manage to go there, and he didn't keep silence. It was a scandal. He said, "I paid them," and it was it was a lot of in newspapers and websites that he said, "I paid 50 millions for that, and they cheated. I'm not the deputy."
Wow.
So it happens. Like, it sounds weird, yeah, that that people may discuss this in public, but
Okay.
this is the peculiarity of Russian political regime, I guess.
I think we're going to the end. There's some. Okay. Rafael.
Right, so thank you for the presentation. I have a very quick question. Out of curiosity, what is the relationship between introduced and adopted laws? Because if I look at your table, and if I am correct, during the first convocation, you had only 17% of introduced laws that were adopted. And now on the last convocation, I think it's like 45% of introduced laws were then adopted. So the first question is, what can possibly explain that? And the second question is, does the individual have an incentive to vote for something that has a higher probability of approval?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So first of all, and this is about the existence of real politics in the parliament. The recent research of my colleagues shows that there are veto players who play a very important role in the voting process. And one of the goals of the strategies of the members of the parliament is to establish ties with these veto players. And in this case, this reciprocity works. So there is politics. And regarding the quantity, as the parliament is ruled by the president's administration, there are some kind of weird KPIs, key performance indicators. And one of the KPI for the deputy is to suggest as many bills as she or he can. Like, that is why they make a lot of ideas, they suggest a lot of ideas, they develop a lot of different bills, and even in this case, they know that these bills will not pass through the expertise. But at the same time, 10 bills. I developed 10 bills. It works the same in, it's not the State Duma, it's not the parliament, it's just the parliament situation. It works in Russian higher education institutions. We have the KPI to apply for the funding, for the grants. And I know a lot of colleagues who just, because this is a KPI, they know that they will never get this funding. That is why they make the application for the grant funding, and to show, I applied for 10 grants this year. Okay. They do not get them, but they fulfill the KPI, key performance indicator. So this is a. Have you heard about Potemkin's villages? Potemkin villages? No, okay, this is for some. Potemkin, Catherine the Great, the empress, he spent a lot of money. She gave a lot of money to her favorite, Knязь Potemkin, who was to build a lot of things in Crimea, and actually he stole all the money. And then Catherine decided to go to Crimea to see what happens there, because a lot of money were spent, and he built the decorations. So they came to the village with decorations, and there were peasants working tidy and so on. And she was, the money is spent in a nice way. It's the same when Putin comes to some town. They know about his road in advance, and the school on his road is renovated in 1 week. The road is renovated, and so on. Once I came to Volgograd to see my friend. You know, Volgograd is very famous for Stalingrad, former Stalingrad. I came to Volgograd, and from the airport, we took the taxi, and I asked the taxi driver, well, the road is really nice. The road is really nice. He said, yes, this is because Putin was here two months ago. When we cross the bridge, you will see the real Stalingrad. And we crossed the bridge, and it was like this. So it's like a lot of imitation. The same is about this development of a lot of bills. So that is why maybe I told you that there is a kind of limitation, that we just focus on the bills that were adopted. But still, if most of other that are not adopted is the imitation, we can operationalize that and to prove that somehow, and it will justify our scope of analysis. But these are just the stories now, not the political science. Just it's anthropology.
Okay, if I may, just one last question. It's not personal, but it is. How do you face, you and your colleagues, some kind of reaction against your research there in Russia? Is there any kind of censorship or difficulty to run it?
I had never faced the problem of publishing anything critical or things like that. However, recently, it's more about self censorship. It works in mass media. When the editor gets the paper, gets the article written by the journalist, and he says, well, I don't want to publish this because they may close us, and a lot of people will lose their jobs. No one knows if it happens, but this is kind of self-censorship. It's the same in political science. Hopefully, censors do not read scientific journals. Yeah. That is why there are a lot of things like critical to political regime, to political elites. Political scientists, moreover, I used to work in St. Petersburg State University. My friends from Higher School of Economics in Moscow, from Moscow State University. This is a big university, so the censors do not touch people who work there. Mm-hmm. But people from some regions, from some small universities, for sure are under pressure, mostly under pressure of regional elites, not like Putin gives the order. No. There is the pressure, and this is also the self-censorship. And finally, nowadays, when the war started, things became more complex, of course. And nowadays, I know that a lot of editors, they refuse. And just in 3 days, I have a chat with my colleagues in Telegram, and my colleague told me that she's an economist. She's not even the political scientist. She's an economist. She studies regional development issues, and she said that she got the reply from the editor of the journal, who said that please do not be so critical. So your paper is accepted, but please delete everything that is critical. This is self-censorship, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if everyone is happy, I am also happy. And I want to thank you very much. I think it was a brilliant start for the new seminar era. And let's hope we keep with all these people and all this quality.
Yeah,
thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.